Hey everyone, it's Tristan back with another video, and in this video I'm taking a look at and comparing the Rolex Submariner 5513 on the left with the Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch on the right. Now in some ways it may not be a fair comparison because the Speedmaster is a chronograph, whereas the Submariner does not have the chronograph feature, and also in terms of just the looks and feature set, probably a better comparison would be the Speedmaster versus the Rolex Daytona. But I own these two watches here, and I've gotten a lot of requests to do a video on, comparing the two, so I figured I would go ahead and do so. Also, you should note that the Submariner costs more money than the Speedmaster as well, but they're certainly close in terms of price, or closer in terms of price than a Rolex Daytona and the Omega Speedmaster. So this is the Speedmaster Moonwatch here, and it's just got a real swanky look to it. I love the domed Hesselite plexiglass crystal on it. It has a very sort of 60s and 70s feel. You can kind of see the qualified for manned space missions insignia on the back. And it's just a real cool classic design and feel. It's a bit of a heavy watch and a bit of a bigger watch. And as you'll see when I put this on my wrist, I have kind of thin wrists. And so it looks sort of big on me. And it's just a little bit of a bulky watch, especially if you have thinner wrists. Now, if you're a bigger guy or something, that's not really going to be an issue. It's going to fit you better if you're kind of a bigger guy, but if you have sort of thin wrists and stuff like I do, it tends to be a little bit of a bulky watch. I mean, it's, relatively, it lays and wears relatively thin and, fits really nice under a cuff and stuff like that. But just the overall diameter of the dial and the watch itself, is a big on the wrist. So I do have to say that's one complaint I have with the Speedmaster. But in general, the Speedmaster is a really cool watch, very aeronautical. The two watches, the Speedmaster or the Submariner, are different because the Submariner is a diver watch, and the Speedmaster is sort of an aeronautical and car racing watch. So they are different. They don't have a lot of overlap in that respect. The Speedmaster also you wouldn't want to use in the water. I think it's only water resistant, not really waterproof in a way. The Speedmaster doesn't have the dive seals and stuff like that, so it's not a dive watch. And I would not recommend you actually swim with it or anything like that, whereas the Submariner is definitely a diver watch that you can actually dive with. And so here's the Submariner 5513. This one is from about 1989, so it is definitely a vintage model. And it's more of an elegant watch, so I have to say it's a nicer size for my wrists. It's also lighter, and it just fits me better overall, I have to say. In terms of the sort of history and provenance, I would have to say that the Submariner has sort of an equal, if not more, history and provenance. It's just different. Its history and provenance is in the diving world, whereas the Speedmaster is, in the aviation world mostly. So they're different in that respect, but in terms of the colorway and all that, they're generally about the same. This Submariner does have faded markers on it and stuff like that, so it looks a little bit older and swankier and stuff like that in terms of it being more of a vintage watch. But as you can see here, as I have it on my wrist, it just sort of fits my hand and my wrist better. It's just more of, I think, a perfect size for me. Just being a bit smaller than the Speedmaster, I just think it sort of fits me more perfectly. So, if I had to choose one of these watches, I would definitely choose the Rolex Submariner. Not only because it's more of a cut above than the Speedmaster. The Speedmaster is more of a sort of mid-tier watch in a way, whereas the Rolex Submariner is just a bit swankier and a bit more sort of a luxury sport watch, in my opinion. But both of these watches sort of have a relatively similar style and colorway, and I think can be worn in many of the same situations, so it's sort of an interesting comparison between the two. In terms of comfort, because the Rolex is a little bit lighter and smaller, it just feels more comfortable. You don't notice it as much on your wrist, whereas switching between the two and going to the Speedmaster, and the Speedmaster feels a lot bulkier and a little bit heavier as well. I wouldn't say that either of them is uncomfortable. However, the Speedmaster is a little bit more uncomfortable, also especially because on the case back of the Speedmaster you've got some engraving and indentations, which if you size it a little bit tight on your wrist, that can actually, poke into your wrist a little bit more. Whereas the Rolex Submariner has a completely smooth and flat case back, which is very comfortable. So this has been my look of the Rolex Submariner 5513 versus the Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please make sure to subscribe. See you in my next video.